I am Joshua, 29, and my own brother kicked me out onto the street at 2 a.m. after selling my only car to pay for his champagne. Before I tell you about how I legally took $20 million right out from under his nose, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. I sold your car. Wyatt did not even look up from his phone when he said it. He just threw a crumpled receipt right at my chest. It bounced off my shirt and landed on the expensive hardwood floor of his penthouse. My cards got declined at the caterer an hour ago, he muttered, tapping away on his screen. The investors were watching. I needed cash right now to cover the deposit. I stood there frozen in the middle of his massive living room. The air conditioning was blasting, but I felt a hot sweat break out on the back of my neck. You sold my Honda? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Wyatt, I pay for that car every single month. I use my entire salary just to keep up with the payments. It is how I get to work. It is my only lifeline. He finally looked up at me. His eyes were completely cold. There was no apology in them. There was not even a flicker of regret. It is titled in my name, Joshua. Remember? Your credit was absolute trash after you took out those loans to help Mom and Dad. So I did you a favor by putting my name on the paperwork. Legally, that car is my property, and I liquidated it. He actually smirked. A tiny, arrogant little smirk. I barely got enough to cover the champagne for tonight. Next time, buy a better car if you want it to matter. I swallowed the heavy lump forming in my throat. I stared at the floor. I looked at him in his custom-tailored suit. Then I looked at his wife, Qley, who was sitting on the leather sofa, giggling at something on her tablet. She did not even look up. She did not care. This was not a family. This was a dictatorship, and I was just a peasant living in it. But little did they know, this dictatorship was about to fall hard. It was 2 in the morning. Los Angeles was baking under a historic heat wave. It was the kind of suffocating heat that keeps the concrete sidewalks radiating pure fire well past midnight. But inside Wyatt's penthouse, it felt like the Arctic. I had gone to my small room in the back to try and sleep off the anger. I just wanted to close my eyes and figure out how I was going to get to my logistics job the next morning without a car. Then my bedroom door banged open. It slammed so hard against the drywall that the plaster cracked. Wyatt stood in the doorway. He was holding a large, black plastic garbage bag in his right hand. He tossed it onto the floor right at the foot of my bed. It landed with a heavy, hollow thud. Get up, he commanded. His voice was not loud, but it was dripping with that manic, entitled irritation that I knew all too well. Qley needs this room. She is doing a massive closet reveal for her live stream tomorrow morning, and your cheap junk is ruining the aesthetic of the background. I sat up, blinking against the harsh, blinding hallway light pouring into my dark room. Wyatt, I said, rubbing my eyes. It is 2 in the morning. You just sold my car. Where am I supposed to go right now? I do not care what time it is, he snapped. You are cluttering up my house. He kicked the black garbage bag toward my feet. I packed for you. Consider it a massive courtesy. Now get out. I looked down at the bag. He had not packed. He had literally shoveled the top layer of my life. A few shirts, my work boots, a toothbrush, into a hefty sack like it was yard waste. My hands started to shake. I looked back up at him. I gave up a major promotion at work last year to stay here and manage this property for you. I gave up everything. Where am I supposed to go? He laughed. It was a short, sharp, cruel sound. Go live in the warehouse. It is empty. At least out there, you will be right at home with your own kind. Trash. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving my door wide open. I sat there on the edge of the mattress for exactly 10 seconds. A younger version of me would have cried. A younger version of me would have run after him down the hallway, begging him to be reasonable. I would have promised to hide my things better. I would have apologized for simply existing in his space. But that version of me died tonight. That version of me evaporated into the dry Los Angeles air the exact moment he pawned my car keys for a few bottles of cheap champagne to impress people who did not even care about him. I did not say another word. I stood up. I pulled on my jeans. I laced up my heavy work boots. I reached down and picked up the garbage bag. It was light. Apparently, my entire value in this family weighed less than 20 pounds. I walked out of the room. I walked past the master bedroom, where I could hear Qley inside loudly complaining to Wyatt about the ring light for her video. I walked past the massive marble kitchen island, where my Honda had been turned into empty, discarded bottles of booze. I walked out the heavy mahogany front door and let it click shut firmly behind me. The elevator ride down to the lobby took forever. When the glass doors finally slid open to the street, the heat hit me like a physical punch to the face. The air smelled of exhaust fumes, hot asphalt, and distant wildfire smoke. I hoisted the garbage bag over my shoulder. I had no car. I had no money for a cab. My credit cards were maxed out from paying Wyatt's bills. Transport was now limited to my own 2 feet. I started walking. It was a 3-mile hike through the darkest parts of the city to the industrial district. With every single step, the rhythm of my boots on the pavement beat a new pattern into my brain. I stopped thinking like a victim. I stopped thinking like a loving brother. I shifted my mind into the only mode that had ever kept me safe and sane: logistics. In my line of work, when a business partner breaches a contract this severely, you do not call customer service to complain. You do not ask for a refund. You secure your remaining assets. You cut your losses entirely. And you prepare for a hostile takeover. Wyatt thought he had just thrown me away like garbage. He did not realize he had just released me from the very last chain holding me back. The walk took over an hour. My shirt was completely soaked with sweat by the time I reached the industrial district. The pavement out here was cracked and uneven, radiating heat right through the thick rubber soles of my boots. Even at 3 in the morning, the air in this part of town tasted like diesel fuel and fine dust. I stood in front of the warehouse. It was not really a building anymore. It was more like a rotting brick tooth sitting in a mouthful of broken concrete. The tall, narrow windows were barred with rusted iron, and the cheap for sale sign that Wyatt had hastily zip-tied to the chain-link fence months ago was peeling off, bleached white by the relentless California sun. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my keyring. I found the heavy, brass spare key. It was the only key I had left to my name. I unlocked the heavy padlock on the front gate. Then I walked up to the massive, corrugated metal rolling door. I grabbed the handle and shoved it upward. The metal groaned and shrieked, the sound echoing loudly down the completely empty street. I stepped inside. The heat in here was suffocating. It was somehow even hotter than outside. The air was thick, stagnant, and smelled intensely of old, rotting cardboard and deep neglect. I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, sweeping the beam across the massive room. There were piles of actual garbage scattered around. Broken wooden pallets, industrial debris, and empty paint cans littered the cracked concrete floor. I walked over to the far corner, kicking aside a rusted pipe, and dropped my garbage bag. I sat down on it. For the first time in 10 years, I finally stopped moving. I stopped fixing things. I stopped running errands. And in that heavy, suffocating stillness, the bitter truth finally caught up to me. I sat there in the pitch dark and replayed the last decade of my life. For my entire adult life, I had been the silent, unpaid partner in a toxic business called Wyatt's Ego. Started small. When our parents suddenly stepped back from their business, everyone assumed it was a tragedy. We held a small gathering that felt more like a funeral for our family's independence. Wyatt immediately stepped up and took the lead. He was the older brother. He was the visionary. He was the self-proclaimed CEO of absolutely nothing. I remember the day we sat in the lawyer's office to sort out the family assets. My parents looked at me with those pleading eyes. Wyatt told me I was too young, too fragile to handle the stress of the estate. He put his hand on my shoulder and said, "I will take the burden, Joshua. You just focus on finishing school. Do not worry about a thing." So, the deeds to the properties went exclusively into his name. The bank accounts went into his name. But somehow, the actual bills always managed to find their way to my mailbox. I sat in the dark warehouse, remembering the brutal winter 3 years ago when the central heater completely broke down in the penthouse. Wyatt was away in Aspen, supposedly networking with rich investors. He called me in a complete panic. "We need to fix this right now, Joshua. It is our home. We cannot let it freeze." I drained my entire savings account to pay the $3,000 repair bill. I gave up the money I had been saving for my own college fund. I remembered when the property taxes on this very warehouse became dangerously delinquent. Wyatt sat me down, looking deeply stressed. "We are going to lose the family legacy if we do not act right now," he told me. "We have to sacrifice." So I sacrificed. I worked double shifts. I used every dime of my salary to pay the county so Wyatt could keep his name on the deed. He loved using that word. We are building an empire. We are in this together. We need to tighten our belts. But tonight, sitting on the dirty concrete, wiping the sweat from my eyes, I realized the absolute truth. In a toxic family, "we" is the most dangerous word in the English dictionary. It is a linguistic trap designed to keep you broke and compliant. When there was a massive debt to pay, it was ours. When there was hard physical work to be done, it was a shared family obligation. But the second there was any profit, any ownership, any authority or credit to be taken, the "we" evaporated instantly. It became his. He sold my car because he genuinely believed he had the right to do it. He did not see it as stealing from his younger brother. He saw it as liquidating an asset that belonged to the corporation of Wyatt. I was never a brother. I was just an employee who had gotten a little too comfortable thinking he had human rights. He kept me poor on purpose so I would stay dependent on him. He engineered my financial desperation so that living in this rotting warehouse would feel like a mercy rather than a punishment. And the worst part? The absolute worst part that made my blood boil in the dark? My parents knew. I recently found out they were not struggling in some modest retirement home like they claimed. They were living in a luxury resort community in Florida. They were using a joint credit card that I was quietly paying off every single month. They allowed Wyatt to drain my life force because it meant they did not have to deal with his tantrums. My stolen inheritance wasn't just money. It was my youth, my peace of mind, and my future. I took a deep breath. The anger was hot and sharp in my chest, but I pushed it down. Anger is useless without a plan. I stood up and picked up my phone flashlight again. I needed to assess my surroundings. I needed to know exactly what I had to work with. I walked the perimeter of the warehouse. The walls were solid brick, though crumbling in places. The roof seemed intact, no visible water damage on the floor. As I walked, I thought about Wyatt. He called this place a massive burden. He constantly complained about it to his rich friends, calling it a rot that was dragging down his real estate portfolio. But as I swept the light over the empty corners and the thick layers of undisturbed dust, a very strange, very interesting thought occurred to me. Wyatt never came here. Not once. Wyatt was absolutely terrified of dirt. He was allergic to anything that even closely resembled manual labor. He treated this side of town like it was a radioactive zone. It was only useful to him as a tax write-off on a balance sheet. He had not set foot inside these brick walls in at least 5 years. Whenever something needed to be checked, he sent me. I walked over to the front gate and peered outside. Dawn was just starting to break, painting the smoggy Los Angeles sky in shades of bruised purple and dull orange. I saw a familiar figure walking down the street with a thermos in his hand. It was Luke, the night security guard who patrolled the adjacent factory lot. I had spoken to him a few times over the years when I came to check the perimeter locks. "Hey, Joshua," Luke called out, looking surprised to see me here so early. "You're up before the sun. Everything okay with the property?" "Just doing a deep audit, Luke," I replied, forcing a casual smile. "Hey, quick question. Have you ever seen my brother, Wyatt, around here? Tall guy, usually wearing a suit that costs more than my life?" Luke chuckled, taking a sip from his thermos. "Wyatt? Man, I haven't seen that guy's shiny shoes in this zip code since they paved the main road back in 2021. He hates this neighborhood. Why? He finally coming down to clean up this mess?" "No," I said softly, looking back into the dark cavern of the warehouse. "No, he isn't. Thanks, Luke." I waved, stepping back inside and pulling the heavy metal door down shut. The sound of the door closing echoed with a heavy finality. I stood in the darkness, letting the reality wash over me. Wyatt had not been here in 5 years. That meant he did not know what was actually in the corners of this building. He did not know what was behind the old drywall. He thought he had exiled me to a miserable prison to break my spirit. He did not realize he had just handed me sole, unsupervised custody of the only thing in our family's name that he had not completely ruined yet. My brain, trained in logistics and supply chain management, began to categorize the space. Area A, clear out the debris. Area B, set up a secure sleeping perimeter. I did not have a bed, but I had cardboard and my clothes. It wasn't comfortable, but for the first time in my life, I was standing on ground where nobody was yelling at me, demanding my money, or telling me I was worthless. I laid out a large, flattened cardboard box. I used my garbage bag of clothes as a makeshift pillow. As I lay down on the hard, unforgiving concrete, I didn't feel defeated. I felt a strange, cold sense of clarity. Wyatt had taken the penthouse. He had taken my car. He had taken my parents' loyalty. But right here, right now, I was the master of this domain. And I was going to find a way to make this place work for me. 7 days later, the Los Angeles heatwave broke a new record. The temperature outside hit 104 degrees. Inside the warehouse, it was basically an industrial oven. The air inside shimmered with dust and brutal stagnation. I was sitting on an overturned wooden crate using my phone, which I had charged at a local coffee shop, to desperately audit my remaining, pitiful cash reserves. I had exactly $42 to my name. Suddenly, the small side door of the warehouse banged open with tremendous force. The harsh afternoon sunlight violently pierced the gloom. Wyatt stormed in. He was wearing a custom-tailored linen suit that probably cost more than my entire college education. But right now, that expensive suit was heavily stained with sweat under the arms and down the back. He looked completely out of place. He looked like a panicked peacock trapped in a landfill. He held a handkerchief over his nose to block the smell of the dust. He did not say hello. He did not ask how I was surviving in an oven without food or water. He marched right up to me and threw a bright red envelope aggressively at my chest. It hit my shirt and fluttered down to the dusty concrete floor. "Pay it," he snapped, his voice tight with rage. I looked down at the red envelope. I slowly reached down and picked it up. It was from the Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Stamped across the top in bold black letters were the words, "Final disconnection notice." I opened the envelope and pulled out the bill. The amount due at the bottom of the page was absolutely staggering. $4,212. "You have been squatting in this dump for a week," Wyatt yelled, wiping his sweaty forehead with his silk handkerchief. "And you have not even bothered to transfer the utilities into your own name. I got a call from a very aggressive collection agency this morning, Joshua. Fix it. I am not paying to keep the damn lights on in a literal garbage dump." I looked at the number again. My mind raced. "Wyatt," I said, keeping my voice incredibly calm. "I haven't used any power. I have been charging my phone with a cheap solar bank I bought for $10. I haven't even turned on a single light bulb in here. The main breaker is off. I do not care what lies you are spinning," he screamed, his face turning red. "The bill is in the estate's name. But actually, no, it isn't. It's tied to your personal guarantor file. David made sure of it." I froze. David? David was our family lawyer. The man I had trusted for years. The man who sat at our dinner table. "Yes, David," Wyatt sneered. "I had him restructure the utility liabilities months ago. You are legally responsible for the operating costs of this property, even though I own the land. It was a brilliant move to protect my credit. So this is your debt. Pay it today or I will have the power company come out here and rip the physical meter right out of the wall." He turned on his heel, eager to escape the suffocating heat and get back to his air-conditioned luxury SUV parked outside. He slammed the metal door shut behind him, leaving me alone in the sweltering silence. I stood there, holding the red envelope. The betrayal stung, but I pushed the emotion aside. Christian, a notoriously ruthless debt collector in the area, had already been leaving threatening voicemails on my phone for the past 2 days regarding other small debts of Wyatt's that I was somehow tied to. Now this, a $4,000 power bill for a building that was completely dark. It made absolutely no sense. I am a logistics coordinator. My actual job is not just moving boxes from point A to point B. My job is analyzing complex data. I look for inefficiencies in supply chains. I look for leaks. I look for numbers that do not align with physical reality. I turned the power bill over. On the back of the DWP statement, there was a bar graph detailing the daily power usage for the last 30 days. When my eyes hit that graph, my brain instantly flagged a massive anomaly. The usage line wasn't jagged. In a normal building, power consumption constantly fluctuates. It peaks during the day when people are awake and using appliances. It drops dramatically at night. It spikes hard when heavy machines turn on, and falls when they turn off. But this line was flat. It was a perfectly straight, horizontal line across the entire 30-day period. High consumption. Constant, unyielding draw. 24 hours a day. 7 days a week. It never dipped. It never spiked. That is not a forgotten refrigerator. That is not a few left-on light bulbs. That is industrial life support. I lowered the paper. I looked around the completely empty, silent warehouse. There were no machines running. There were no humming vents. There was nothing but thick dust, dead silence, and oppressive heat. But the physical power meter outside does not lie. Somewhere inside this building, something was eating electricity like a starving animal. I turned on my phone flashlight. I walked straight to the main breaker box located on the far brick wall. It was an old, heavy industrial panel, covered in decades of black grime and spiderwebs. I pulled the metal latch and yanked the heavy door open. Inside, most of the thick black switches were taped off with old electrical tape, clearly labeled, defunct. But there was one breaker down at the very bottom right. It was a massive, heavy-duty switch labeled Zone 4. I reached out and hovered my fingers over the plastic switch. It was radiating heat. It was hot to the touch. Electricity, massive amounts of it, was flowing right through this breaker at this exact second. I looked up. I followed the thick, gray metal conduit pipe connected to that breaker. It ran straight up the brick wall, securely fastened with metal brackets. It traveled across the high steel ceiling trusses, weaving through the darkness. I tracked it with my flashlight beam. The pipe ran all the way across the ceiling and then went straight down, disappearing directly behind a massive stack of rotting plywood sheets leaning heavily against the back left corner of the warehouse. I walked slowly toward that corner. My boots crunched lightly on the dirt. I reached out and grabbed the edge of the first heavy sheet of plywood. I braced my legs and pulled it away. It crashed loudly to the concrete floor, kicking up a massive, choking cloud of gray dust. I waved the dust away from my face and shined my light at what the plywood had been hiding. It was not a brick wall. It was drywall. Clean, relatively modern drywall. Someone had built a partition. They had constructed a massive false wall to artificially shorten the length of the warehouse room. It was built perfectly flush to make the room look naturally smaller. I walked back to my tool bag. I reached inside and pulled out my heavy, solid steel crowbar. My heart was pounding hard against my ribs. I walked back to the false wall. I found a seam where 2 drywall panels met. I jammed the sharp end of the crowbar deep into the seam, planted my boots, and pulled back with all my strength. The drywall cracked with a loud snap, crumbled outward. Immediately, a blast of freezing cold air hit me right in the face. It was shocking. It was sterile, perfectly conditioned air. And with that cold air came a sound. It was a low, steady, powerful hum that had been completely muffled by heavy layers of fiberglass insulation packed behind the wall. I gripped the crowbar tighter. I smashed the hole bigger. I tore away chunks of drywall and pink insulation until the hole was large enough for me to step through. I clicked my flashlight to its brightest setting and stepped through the jagged hole. I stepped inside, and the cold air immediately gave me goosebumps. I was not looking at a forgotten storage closet. I was standing inside a state-of-the-art, climate-controlled vault. The space was massive, almost taking up a third of the entire building's actual footprint. It was pitch black in here, illuminated only by the constant, blinking green LED lights of massive, industrial-grade dehumidifiers and air conditioning units lining the walls. They were the source of the deep hum. They were the reason for the massive $4,000 power bill. I raised my flashlight. My hand was visibly shaking. The bright white beam cut through the pristine, dust-free darkness and hit something directly in the center of the room. It looked like a giant, clear plastic blister. It was a car capsule, an inflatable, heavy-duty storage bubble used by high-end collectors to preserve priceless vehicles in a perfect vacuum environment. And there wasn't just one. I moved the light to the left, then to the right. There were 4 of them. 4 massive, shimmering clear bubbles lined up in absolute military precision across the polished concrete floor. Couldn't breathe. I slowly walked to the first bubble on the far left. My flashlight beam danced over the elegant, sweeping curves of the metal inside. It was a massive, majestic vehicle. The chrome bumper caught the light and reflected it back like a mirror. It was a Rolls-Royce Phantom V. It was vintage, flawless, in a deep midnight blue that looked like dark glass. I stumbled back, my mind spinning. I moved to the next bubble. Red. Bright, aggressive, heart-stopping red. The low-slung hood, the iconic wire wheels. It was a Ferrari 250 GTO. Even I, someone who only drove a cheap Honda, knew what this was. This was automotive royalty. This was the kind of car billionaires fought over in secret rooms. I scrambled to the third bubble. A stunning, low-profile Lamborghini Miura, painted in a vibrant, flawless mustard yellow. The eyelashes around the headlights were perfect. And finally, the fourth bubble. A silver, sleek, perfectly preserved Porsche 356 Speedster. My heart felt like it was going to hammer its way right out of my chest. Wyatt had called this place a burden. He had called it a rotting tooth. He had just thrown a final disconnection notice in my face because he was too insanely cheap to pay the bill. He did not know. He had never bothered to look behind a single piece of plywood. He was so incredibly blinded by his own arrogance and his hatred for manual labor that he had been sitting on top of the holy grail of automotive history, treating it like a toxic landfill. I wasn't standing in a rundown warehouse anymore. I was standing in a bank vault, and I was the only living person who knew the combination. I did not call Wyatt. I did not call my parents. I did not call the power company to complain about the bill. I pulled out my phone and I called Gabriel. Gabriel was an elite freight specialist. We had worked together on a massive nightmare logistics contract 2 years ago, involving shipping a container of vintage luxury watches to a private buyer in Dubai. Gabriel was a man who did not ask unnecessary questions. He just knew exactly what rare things were worth, and he knew how to move them securely. He answered on the second ring. "Joshua? It's early, man." "Gabriel, I need you here right now," I said, my voice tight. "Bring Elijah." Elijah was Gabriel's mentor, a legendary classic car appraiser who rarely left his office. Gabriel paused. "Joshua, Elijah doesn't do house calls unless it's a museum piece. Tell him to bring his glasses, Gabriel. Just get here." They pulled up to the warehouse 40 minutes later in a completely nondescript black SUV. They stepped out into the blazing heat. Gabriel looked at the peeling paint on the fence, the barred windows, and the general decay of the street with a deep, skeptical frown. "You said you had a high-value cargo issue, Joshua," Gabriel said, stepping carefully over a dark puddle of motor oil near the entrance. "This looks more like a demolition site." "It is not about the building, Gabriel. It is about the inventory." I led them inside the sweltering main room, straight to the broken false wall. I handed Elijah a heavy-duty flashlight. "Zone 4, I said simply. "Take a look." Elijah, an older man with sharp eyes, stepped carefully through the jagged hole in the drywall. I heard his breath catch in his throat. Then absolute silence. A long, heavy, stunned silence. Gabriel and I followed him in. Elijah was standing in front of the clear plastic bubble holding the red Ferrari. His face was mere inches from the plastic. He wasn't looking at it like a car. He was looking at it like a lost religious artifact. "My God," Elijah whispered, his voice trembling. "The chassis numbers, the interior stitching. Joshua, where did you find this?" He spent the next hour moving down the line. He checked VIN plates through the clear plastic. He inspected tire treads. He verified the factory paint codes on the Porsche and the Rolls-Royce. He was physically shaking. Finally, he walked back to me. He took off his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. He looked me dead in the eye. "Joshua, do you have any idea what you are standing on?" "I have a guess," I said. "But I need a number. A conservative number. If we liquidated this quietly right now to a private buyer network." Elijah took a deep breath. "Fast cash? $12 million. Easy." My stomach completely dropped out. 12 million. If we took our time, Gabriel chimed in, his eyes wide. If we marketed this as a legendary barn find collection, took it to a premier auction, 15 million. Maybe $20 million. $20 million. Just then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text message from Wyatt. It read, "Dylan, the real estate agent says he can get a buyer for the warehouse land today for $500,000. Covers my urgent debts. Get your trash out by tomorrow, or the bulldozers will bury you with it." Wyatt was selling the land for $500,000 to pay off his own stupid debts. He was about to throw away $20 million because he was too lazy to look behind a sheet of drywall. Gabriel looked at me, realizing who owned the building. "Does the owner know?" "The owner," I said, staring at the text message, "thinks this vault is filled with hazardous industrial waste. And I am going to help him take out the trash." I texted Wyatt back. "Meet me at the warehouse at 3 p.m. Bring David the lawyer. We need to finalize the land sale and handle the debris inside." At exactly 3 p.m., Wyatt's luxury SUV pulled up. He stepped out, already looking violently annoyed. David, our slick family lawyer, followed him, clutching a leather briefcase. "Make this fast, Joshua," Wyatt snapped, waving away the dust from his face. "Qley has a reservation at Nobu at 5, and I am not smelling like a dumpster for dinner. Dylan has the buyer ready to wire the $500,000 for the dirt. Are you packed?" I stood near the front gate, looking defeated. "I am, but we have a massive problem, Wyatt." I led them inside, keeping them near the front door, far away from the false wall in the back. I pointed to the massive piles of broken pallets, rusted metal pipes, and rotting cardboard. "The buyer's inspector came by an hour ago." I lied smoothly, keeping my face deadpan. "He saw the chemical barrels in the back. He said the city will classify this entire interior as hazardous commercial waste. If you sell the land as is with this inside, the city will hit you with a $50,000 environmental penalty fine before the escrow even clears." Wyatt's face drained of color. 50,000? I don't have 50,000. The debt collector is already freezing my accounts. "David, is this true?" David frowned, adjusting his tie. "The city is very strict on industrial waste, Wyatt. If Joshua is right about the inspector, this could delay the sale by months." Wyatt paced furiously. "I need that $500,000 today. This is a disaster. You were supposed to manage this place, Joshua. You worthless." "I can fix it," I interrupted loudly. Wyatt stopped and glared at me. "How?" "I will take on the liability," I said, looking down at my dirty boots to hide my eyes. "I have a friend with a commercial dumping license. He will haul everything out of here tonight. It will cost me a few grand, but I will do it." Wyatt narrowed his eyes. "Why would you do that for me?" "Because," I said, looking up at him, playing the pathetic younger brother perfectly, "I need a clean break. But my friend won't touch the stuff unless he has legal ownership of the scrap. He recycles it. To protect you from the city fines, you need to sign a waiver legally transferring ownership of absolutely all physical contents inside these four walls to me. Not the land. Just the contents. The trash. Once it's legally mine, I haul it, I take the fine risk, and you sell the clean land to Dylan's buyer tomorrow morning." Wyatt looked at David. "Do it," Wyatt ordered. "Draft it right now." David pulled a laptop from his briefcase, resting it on a dirty crate. He typed rapidly. Within 10 minutes, he printed a single-page document from a portable printer in his car. He handed it to Wyatt. "It transfers all physical property, inventory, materials, and contents currently housed within the structure located at this address to Joshua," David explained. "It legally defines the contents as salvage and waste. You retain the land deed." Wyatt snatched the pen. He didn't even read the paragraph. He was so panicked about losing his $500,000 payout, and so unbelievably arrogant to think I was just a stupid garbage man saving his skin, that he signed his name with a furious flourish. He shoved the paper into my chest. "You are an idiot, Joshua," he sneered, straightening his suit jacket. "Enjoy your garbage. Do not ever call me again. We are done." He turned and walked out the door. David followed. They got into the SUV and drove away, leaving me standing alone in the heat. I looked down at the piece of paper in my hand. It had his signature. It had David's notary stamp. It was legally binding. I didn't just own the trash. I owned the Rolls-Royce. I owned the Ferrari. I owned the $20 million secret. This is a moment that changed everything, when I finally regained control of my life. Thank you for your patience in getting this far. You are amazing. Please like the video and leave a comment below to let me know you've been with me. This will not only help more people find this story, but also let me know that my experiences are meaningful to someone. Your support is the biggest motivation for me to continue sharing the rest of this journey. The moment Wyatt's taillights disappeared around the corner, I pulled out my phone and dialed Gabriel again. "It is done," I told him, staring at the signed legal document in my hand. "Bring the trucks." Gabriel did not waste a single second. At exactly midnight, the industrial street outside the warehouse was completely locked down. 3 massive, unmarked, climate-controlled semi-trucks rolled silently up to the front gate. Gabriel had brought an entire specialized crew of professional automotive handlers. They were dressed in dark clothes, moving with absolute military precision. I rolled up the massive front door of the warehouse. The crew moved inside, carrying heavy-duty portable ramps and thick moving blankets. We walked straight to the back, past the piles of literal garbage to the false wall. We tore down the rest of the drywall, fully exposing the gleaming vault. It took them 4 agonizing hours to safely deflate the preservation bubbles and carefully winch the incredibly rare cars onto the specialized transport beds. Every time the heavy chains clanked, I held my breath, terrified that Wyatt might suddenly realize his mistake and drive back. But he didn't. He was probably sitting in a fancy restaurant, drinking champagne, celebrating the fact that he was about to sell the land for $500,000, convinced he had completely outsmarted me. By 4:30 a.m., the vault was completely empty. The Rolls-Royce, the Ferrari, the Lamborghini, and the Porsche were gone, secured safely in Gabriel's highly classified storage facility on the other side of the state. I stood alone in the center of the warehouse. The sun was just starting to peek over the Los Angeles skyline, casting long, dusty shadows across the cracked floor. The building was now truly what Wyatt always thought it was: a hollow, empty shell of dirt and broken concrete. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Wyatt. "Dylan just wired the $500,000 for the land sale. Escrow is closed. The bulldozer arrives tomorrow. I hope you got your trash out, loser. Lose my number." I stared at the screen. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't feel sad. I felt an overwhelming wave of cold, absolute peace. The game was over and I had won. I replied with a simple thumbs-up emoji and put my phone away. 3 days later, I was sitting in a high-end, leatherback chair inside the executive office of Sotheby's auction house in Beverly Hills. Across the heavy oak desk sat Carter, the senior director of Classic Automotive Acquisitions. Carter slid a thick, premium-bound appraisal folder across the desk toward me. "The official authentication is complete, Joshua," he said, his voice laced with deep respect. "The provenance is flawless. The Ferrari alone is going to shatter records. Our conservative estimate for the entire collection at the upcoming Geneva auction is $22 million. I nodded slowly. Thank you, Carter. I walked out of the office and sat in my newly purchased, reliable truck parked outside. I opened my laptop. It was time. I drafted a single email. I attached the scanned, legally binding contract that Wyatt had signed, transferring all contents of the warehouse to me. Then, I attached the official Sotheby's appraisal document detailing the $22 million valuation of the 4 cars found inside the building. I added Wyatt to the recipient list. I added my parents, who were sitting comfortably in their Florida resort, paying for drinks with a credit card I had just permanently canceled. And finally, I added David the lawyer, the man who had drafted the very contract that ruined them. I didn't write a long, emotional paragraph. I didn't demand an apology. I just typed one single sentence in the body of the email. Thank you for letting me take out the trash. I hit send. I didn't have to wait long. Exactly 4 minutes later, my phone began to ring wildly. It was Wyatt. I watched his name flash on the screen. The picture of him in his expensive suit, smiling arrogantly, lit up the glass. I let it ring. It stopped, then immediately started ringing again. Then came the texts. Joshua, what is this? Is this a joke? Answer the phone. You stole from me. David says the contract is binding. I will kill you. I turned the phone off, tossed it onto the passenger seat, and put the truck in gear. The storm was finally over. The truth had exploded in their faces, and there was absolutely nothing they could do to put the pieces back together. Wyatt had traded a $22 million dynasty for a few bottles of champagne and a quick land sale. He had played himself, and I was finally free. 1 exactly year has passed since that sweltering morning when I watched Wyatt's luxury SUV drive away from the warehouse. A lot can happen in 365 days when you are no longer carrying the dead weight of a toxic family on your back. Let me take you back to the Sotheby's auction in Geneva, Switzerland. I didn't go in person. I watched it live via a secure satellite feed sitting in Carter's plush Beverly Hills office. The room was dead silent except for the crisp, British accent of the auctioneer coming through the high-end speakers. We had spent months marketing the collection as the lost cinema fleet. The automotive world was in an absolute frenzy. Rumors had been swirling for decades about the exact location of that specific Ferrari 250 GTO. Finding it perfectly preserved in an inflatable bubble behind a false drywall partition in Los Angeles was the kind of story billionaires aggressively opened their checkbooks for. When the Ferrari finally rolled onto the brightly lit stage, the bidding war was ferocious. It was entirely between a tech magnate from Seattle and a private collector from Dubai. The numbers climbed so fast it made my vision blur. 10 million, 15 million, teen. It finally hammered down at a staggering $21 million. Just for that one car. The Rolls-Royce and the Lamborghini brought in another combined $8 million. I kept the silver Porsche 356 Speedster. I couldn't bring myself to sell it. It was a reminder, a beautiful, perfectly engineered reminder that the greatest treasures are often hidden in the places people are too arrogant to look. With the auction funds securely wired into a newly established trust, I made my moves. I did not buy a penthouse. I did not buy expensive champagne or custom linen suits. I used the money to buy the exact logistics firm where I had been working 80-hour weeks just a year prior. I walked into the main office on a Tuesday morning, not as the guy who sacrificed his promotion to help his brother, but as the sole majority shareholder. The look on my former boss's face when I signed the acquisition paperwork was priceless. Then, I bought back my grandparents' old house in Pasadena. It was a modest, beautiful craftsman home with a wide front porch and a huge oak tree in the front yard. My parents had lost it years ago due to their own terrible financial mismanagement, choosing to fund their lavish lifestyle rather than pay the mortgage. Getting the keys to that house felt like closing a bleeding wound. I spent weeks restoring the original hardwood floors and painting the walls. It became my sanctuary, a quiet, peaceful place entirely funded by my own stolen inheritance that I had rightfully reclaimed. Meanwhile, Wyatt's world was violently burning to the ground. He tried to sue me, of course. 2 weeks after the email dropped, I was served with a massive stack of legal papers. He accused me of fraud, grand theft, and severe emotional distress. We ended up in a sterile, brightly lit courtroom in downtown Los Angeles. Wyatt looked terrible. His suit was wrinkled. He had dark circles under his eyes, and his hands visibly shook. David, his slick lawyer, tried his absolute best to argue that the contract was signed under extreme duress and deliberate misrepresentation. My legal team, funded by the Sotheby's advance, simply presented the signed document to the judge. It was a masterpiece of legal irony. David himself had drafted the exact wording. The document clearly stated that Wyatt willingly transferred all physical property, inventory, materials, and contents located at the warehouse address to me, Joshua, defining them strictly as salvage and waste. The judge looked over her glasses at Wyatt. She asked him one simple question. Did you physically inspect the contents of the building before signing a legal document, abandoning them to avoid a municipal fine? Wyatt stammered. He tried to explain about the dirt, the heat, his dinner reservations at Nobu. He tried to say I tricked him. The judge slammed her gavel down. Case dismissed with prejudice. She ruled that willful ignorance is not a valid legal defense for breaking a contract you had your own lawyer draft. Wyatt had legally, formally, and bindingly given me the cars. That courtroom defeat was the final nail in the coffin. Qley, Wyatt's wife, had married him for the aesthetic and the bank account. The moment she realized the $20 million collection was legally mine and Wyatt was drowning in legal fees, she filed for divorce. It was a brutal, swift, and merciless process. She didn't want custody of his problems. She hired a shark of a lawyer who uncovered all of Wyatt's hidden debts. In the final settlement, Qley managed to secure the entire $500,000 from the warehouse land sale, claiming it was necessary to maintain her standard of living while Wyatt had squandered marital assets. Wyatt was left with absolutely nothing. No cars, no land, no wife. He was officially evicted from the Santa Monica penthouse 3 months later when he couldn't make the massive monthly lease payment. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that he was sleeping on a friend's couch in a studio apartment, desperately trying to get a job in retail sales. I thought I had finally cut all the rotting branches off my family tree, but toxic roots run incredibly deep. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my spacious corner office at the logistics firm, reviewing quarterly salary projections and planning a major expansion of our trucking fleet. My desk phone buzzed. It was the front lobby receptionist. Joshua, she said, her voice sounding a bit strained. There is an older couple down here. They are causing quite a scene. They say they are your parents. I slowly put my pen down. A cold, heavy knot formed in my stomach. Send them up, I replied softly. The heavy glass doors of my office swung open. Matthew and Sarah walked in. They looked vastly different from the perfectly tanned, relaxed retirees I had seen in their social media posts from Florida. My father's shoulders were slumped, and his expensive golf shirt looked faded. My mother looked frantic, clutching a cheap faux-leather handbag. They had flown all the way back to California because the joint credit card they had been using to fund their country club lifestyle had finally bounced. I had closed that account the exact same day the Ferrari was loaded onto Gabriel's transport truck. Without my monthly salary quietly paying off their massive balances, their manufactured reality had collapsed. Joshua, my mother cried out, rushing forward. She tried to throw her arms around me, but I stepped back behind my large mahogany desk. She stopped, looking incredibly confused and hurt by the physical boundary. What are you doing here? I asked. My voice was completely flat. There was no anger left in it, just a profound, heavy emptiness. We need your help, son, my father said, stepping forward. He tried to put on that old, authoritative voice he used when I was a kid, but it cracked. Everything is a disaster. Wyatt is completely ruined. He has no money for food. He lost the apartment, and our bank accounts are frozen. We had to borrow money from a neighbor just to buy economy plane tickets to get here. My mother started sobbing loudly. Felt theatrical, felt rehearsed. Joshua, you have to fix this. You have all that money now. Millions of dollars. You are our son. We are blood. You cannot just leave your family out in the cold. We need a loan. Just a small loan to get Wyatt back on his feet and pay off our resort fees. Maybe $1 million. It is nothing to you now. I looked at them. I really looked at them. These were the people who stood by and watched Wyatt financially abuse me for a decade. These were the people who told me to give up my college fund so Wyatt could fix his heater. These were the people who treated my independence, my very existence, like a burden. I reached into my desk drawer. I pulled out a thick manila folder. I tossed it onto the center of the desk. It landed with a loud slap. Do you know what this is? I asked them. They stared at the folder, silent. This is a complete, itemized ledger of every single dollar I spent keeping this family afloat over the last 10 years. I said, tapping the folder with my index finger. Every utility bill. Every property tax payment for the warehouse. Every single credit card payment for your Florida vacations. It totals over $300,000 of my own hard-earned salary. Money I bled for while Wyatt drank champagne and called me trash. Joshua, that is in the past, my father pleaded, raising his hands. We made mistakes, but we are a family. We have to forgive. Forgive? I let out a short, hollow laugh. You didn't come here for forgiveness. You came here because the ATM machine finally changed its PIN. When Wyatt threw me out of the house at 2 in the morning, where were you? When I called you from the street, begging for a place to stay, you let it go to voicemail. My mother covered her face with her hands. Wyatt was under a lot of stress. He didn't mean it. He meant every single word. I shot back, my voice finally rising, echoing off the glass walls of the office. He told me to go live in the warehouse because I belonged with the garbage. He sold my car. He tried to saddle me with a $4,000 power bill while he was secretly trying to sell the land out from under me. I walked around the desk and stood directly in front of them. They instinctively shrank back. I am not your bank, I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy whisper. I am not Wyatt's safety net. I am exactly what you all raised me to be. I am the guy who cleans up the messes. But this time I am keeping the salvage. Joshua, please, my mother begged, grabbing my arm. He is your brother. He was the golden child. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my arm. Exactly. He was the golden child. He wore the crown you two gave him. But I am just a garbage man. And garbage cannot feed Wyatt's crown. I picked up the phone on my desk and pressed the intercom button. Security. Please come up to the executive office and escort Mr. and Mrs. Evans out of the building. They are trespassing. My father's face turned bright purple with absolute rage. You cannot do this to us. We gave you life. You owe us. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied, turning my back to them and walking toward the large window overlooking the bustling logistics yard below. The debt has been paid in full. Do not ever contact me again. I stood by the window and watched as 2 large security guards gently but firmly guided my screaming, crying parents out of the office suite. I didn't feel a shred of guilt. I felt like I had finally excised a massive, malignant tumor from my life. The cycle of financial and emotional abuse was permanently broken. The late afternoon sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean in brilliant shades of crushed gold, deep violet, and fiery orange. I shifted the heavy, mechanical gear lever into fourth. The silver Porsche 356 Speedster responded instantly, the beautifully tuned engine roaring with a deep, throaty growl that vibrated right through the leather seats and into my chest. I was driving north on the Pacific Coast Highway. The convertible top was down, and the salty, cool ocean wind was whipping violently through my hair. I realized exactly where I was. I was driving the exact same stretch of coastline, just a few miles down from Santa Monica, where I had walked that terrible, suffocating night a year ago. I slowed the car down and pulled over onto a scenic turnout carved into the side of the coastal cliff. I turned off the engine. The sudden silence was filled only by the rhythmic, powerful crashing of the ocean waves against the jagged rocks far below. I sat there in the driver's seat, resting my hands lightly on the original wooden steering wheel. I looked out at the endless horizon. If you had told me a year ago, when I was walking the streets with my entire life stuffed into a cheap plastic garbage bag, that I would be sitting here today, I would have thought you were completely insane. Back then, my entire worldview was defined by what my family told me I was. They told me I was weak. They told me I was strictly a supporting character in Wyatt's grand, spectacular life story. They made me believe that my only real value was my ability to absorb their stress, pay their debts, and quietly disappear into the background. But out there in the dark, sweltering heat of that abandoned warehouse, something fundamental shifted inside of me. When Wyatt kicked me to the curb, he didn't destroy me. He accidentally cured me. He shattered the powerful illusion of our family dynamic. He forced me to look at the raw, ugly truth of how they viewed me. And once you see that truth, you can never unsee it. I traced my finger over the smooth, polished silver dashboard of the Porsche. This car is a masterpiece. But for decades, it sat entirely forgotten in the dark, hidden behind a cheap, hastily built wall of drywall, slowly gathering dust. It was completely ignored by a man who was too obsessed with maintaining a fake image of wealth to actually look at what was right in front of him. I used to be exactly like this car. Hidden, undervalued, kept completely in the dark by people who wanted to exploit my energy without ever recognizing my worth. But not anymore. I tore down the false wall in that warehouse, but more importantly, I tore down the false wall inside my own mind. I stopped waiting for my family to suddenly wake up and appreciate me. I stopped hoping that if I just worked a little harder, paid one more bill, or sacrificed one more promotion, they would finally love me the way I deserve to be loved. I took back my power. I used my skills, my logic, and my deep understanding of the situation to legally outmaneuver the people who thought I was completely stupid. I secured my financial freedom, not by stealing, but by utilizing the exact arrogance and laziness of my abusers against them. I stepped out of the car. I walked to the edge of the cliff and took a deep breath of the incredibly clean, salty air. The sky was vast and open. There were no limits anymore. No more debts hanging over my head. No more manipulative phone calls. No more desperately trying to please people who were fundamentally committed to misunderstanding me. I am Joshua. I am 29 years old. My brother tried to bury me in the trash. But what he didn't realize is that some seeds only need a little bit of dirt to finally take root, break through the concrete, and grow into something completely unstoppable. The sun finally dipped below the horizon, taking the last remnants of the past away with it. Tomorrow is a brand new day, and for the first time in my entire life, I am the one holding the keys. We spend so much of our lives letting other people write our story. We let toxic family members, terrible bosses, or selfish partners dictate our value. The biggest lesson I learned from sitting in the dirt of that warehouse is this: true wealth is not just about the numbers in your bank account, and true poverty is not just a lack of money. Wyatt had a penthouse, but his mindset was completely bankrupt. He was impoverished by his own arrogance and laziness. Financial freedom begins the exact moment you realize you are funding your own oppression. You cannot heal in the exact same environment that made you sick. Sometimes, the most powerful personal development move you can ever make is to stop trying to fix toxic people and instead use your energy to quietly secure your own future. You have to set ironclad boundaries, even if it means walking away from the people you share DNA with. I want to hear from you. What is the biggest lesson you are taking away from my story today? Have you ever had to walk away from a toxic situation to finally find your own worth? Share your favorite takeaway in the comments below, or simply comment the word "good," so I know that these lessons resonated with you. Your engagement helps this community grow and supports others who might be going through the exact same darkness I did. Keep driving forward.